from Bainbridge Island. If you are a returning listener, you know how we balance serious literary discussion with accessible conversation. We're not afraid of complexity, but we don't want to hide behind it either. Are you new to poetry? Perfect. You'll find both entry points and deeper currents here. This is episode 32, and we've built something different here. Whether you come armed with your MFA or if you're just curious about verse, we create a space for both the rigorous analysis and the genuine human experience and human response. Smart conversations about poetry actually matter. When we're not recording, Ben and I run Bainbridge Island Press, where we publish contemporary poetry, but Poetics here is where we get to talk about why this art form still matters and why it's more relevant than ever. So today we are actually exploring a project that I did a few years ago. It went on for quite a few years, and it was called Poetry and Coffees. We'll get to that in a second, but in the meantime, get comfortable, grab your coffee, grab your tea, grab a cocktail if it's after 6, and let's dive in. We're about to explore this ancient form of poetry that is both timeless and completely current. Welcome to POETICS Podcast. So a few years ago, I was running between extracurricular activities with the kids. And I would drop some kids off somewhere and then have half an hour in between and then drop half the other kids somewhere else. It was just years of music classes and sports events. And that was, you have that period of time. If you have kids and they're in sports, if they're in music, then you live in the car for 8 hours of the day, which is great. But you have to use your time. And at that time, there was a Starbucks that was in between everything. And it was a great hub that I could go and get a cup of tea and read a little bit and then go fetch the kids somewhere else. So in that time, they would always ask me my name, which my name is Tamara. And it can get mispronounced and miswritten and spelled incorrect. I mean, there's no right way of pronouncing my name, and it can be spelled anyways. I got tired of that in elementary school. So I actually don't give Starbucks my real name because it's just a hassle. So I would always say, like, my name is Beth. My name is Jenny. Something like that. And then one day I'm just like, my name is Cleopatra. And they're like, oh, is that with a capital C? And all of a sudden I realized, I'm like, why am I wasting this precious moment to give them the name of a poet? And then I can read a poem from that poet, actually. And I did that for years, and I put it on an Instagram page, and it really was just for me to kill time, but all of a sudden it became this opportunity to read so much more poetry that I was not aware of. So if it was a Thursday, I would look up poems about Thursday, and there's poems about Thursday. So anyways, I'm going to be exploring that a little bit, and we'll see how it goes. But before I do that, the question that we're answering today, that we'll be following up with a poem from Poetry and Coffees, is, what is poetry really? And isn't that the dead horse that we just can't stop beating, isn't it? I have 5 million books of poetry, critique, and analysis. Aristotle wrote, he was trying to answer, what is poetry? That it never ends, because poetry never ends. These questions are important because poetry is always evolving and changing, because it is a reflection of the human experience, and we are always changing. That is why there's so many books. There's no one answer. And there are different ways of approaching poetry. You can approach it from a formalist standpoint. You can approach it from a free verse standpoint. There's a lot of different ways of approaching poetry because there's a lot of different ways of approaching the human experience. That is an answer. So I've been chasing poetry ever since I could write. I have written in the shadow of Dickinson. I've written with the meaning of rivers. I have read Wordsworth. It took me a while to understand Edna St. Vincent, and I know that it seems like she should be straightforward. That one took me a while, but T.S. Eliot, nah, that was easy. I don't know why. We're all human experience. It's different for everyone. But poetry, if you say, what is poetry? You're going to get a billion different answers, because some of the answers will be, it is the rhythm of nature. It is the languid clouds that cover the sun. It is the change of the weather. It is the crash of the waves stirring up sand around my feet. It is the voice of another. Those are metaphors answering the question, but the thing that keeps me awake at night is I was asked this in an interview once, what is poetry? And I'm still not comfortable with this question. I don't think that's pretty clear. It's just such a frustrating question because it suggests there's an easy answer. We can define algebra simply enough. Merriam-Webster tells us that it is a branch of mathematics that uses letters to represent numbers. Clean, precise. But poetry, the dictionary, gives us metrical writing. And that falls completely short of answering the question, what is poetry? So let me try a different approach. What is poetry really? I think there are three fundamental truths that we need to understand. First, poetry is the ancient language of prophets and mystics who used figurative language to describe the human condition. And this is where it began, with people who needed to speak truths that couldn't be captured in literal language. They needed metaphor, symbol, an image to convey what it means to be human, to be alive, to suffer and love and die, to grieve. When the psalmist wrote, "The Lord is my shepherd," when Isaiah spoke of swords beaten into plowshares, when mystics across cultures reached for images of fire and water and light, they were creating the DNA of what we now call poetry. They understood that some truths can only be told slant, as Dickinson would later put it. Second, poetry is fundamentally different from prose because poetry uses the foundation of the line to craft a verse. This isn't just about form or structure. It is about how meaning is made in the line. In prose, we think in sentences, in paragraphs. In prose, it is the Latin contraction for pro, which is forward, and verse, which is plow. It is a plow line that goes forward and it doesn't turn. A verse turns. A verse looks like a plow on a page. Prose just goes in it's one story. Verse is going into different places. I hope that makes sense. But in poetry, the line is the building block of the poem. Each line carries weight. It carries a pause. It creates tension or release. the lines come together to create verses, and these verses work together to create a poem that discusses one thing, one image, one moment, one truth examined. When William Carlos Williams, when he wrote, "So much depends upon a red wheel barrow," the line breaks are not arbitrary. They are doing the work of the meaning. Okay, third. Poetry is the use of language to express the human condition with metaphor, simile, conceit, imagination. This is where Aristotle was exactly right when he said that the greatest thing by far is to have the command of metaphor. In Poetics, poetry doesn't just describe, it transforms. It takes the red wheelbarrow, he makes it carry the weight of everything that depends on attention, on the ordinary made extraordinary. It uses every tool of the figurative language, metaphor that says one thing is another, simile that draws connections, conceit that extends comparisons into entire worlds, imagination that bodies forth the forms of things unknown and gives them a name. These three things work together to create what is poetry actually. The ancient impulse to speak through truth, through symbol, meets the technical craft of line and verse, is meeting the full arsenal of figurative language. That's what poetry really is. And that's why it matters now more than ever in a world that it demands literal answers, immediate understanding, surface truth. Poetry insists on depth. It insists that some experiences can only be captured through the slant approach, the metaphorical leap, the imaginative transformation of ordinary language into something that can hold the full weight of what it means to be human. Poetry is our measure for speaking the unspeakable, for making the invisible visible, for transforming experience into something that can travel across time, touch another soul centuries later. It is probably the most important writing that we have. It is the most ancient, and somehow it is completely present tense. That is my answer. What is poetry? That is poetry. And that leads us to the first poem that we're going to be discussing in the Poetry and Coffee's catalog. So if you were asked, just name a poet just off the top of your head without thinking, and it can't be Shakespeare, it has to be Emily Dickinson. And so that was the first poet that I chose when I was asked what my name is by the barista. And I said, my name is Emily. So we are going to be talking briefly about A Bird Came Down the Walk by Emily Dickinson. A bird came down the walk. He did not know I saw. He bit an angleworm in halves and ate the fellow raw. And then he drank a dew from a convenient grass, and then hopped sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. He glanced with rapid eyes that hurried all abroad. They looked like frightened beads, I thought. He stirred his velvet head, like one in danger, cautious. I offered him a crumb, and he unrolled his feathers and rowed him softer home. Then oars divide the ocean, to silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks of noon leap plashless as they swim. This is not a free verse rhyme. This is a poem that follows a 5-stanza pattern with 4 lines each. It is written in the common meter, and that is alternating lines of iambic tetrameter and iambic trimeter. So that's 8 syllables or 6 syllables, which isn't really, in English, we don't count them by syllables. Actually, we count them in stresses. Romantic languages count in syllables. So in French, it's syllables. In Italian, it's syllables. I believe in Spanish, it's syllables. But because English is a more Germanic language, we actually count them by stresses. So usually it's by speaking stress or word stress. So I'm not going to get into that today. I'm going to let you take a little break on that, but we'll get into it another time. So anyways, this is the common meter. It is 8 syllables and 6 syllables. It creates an 8-6-8-6 syllabic pattern. It gives the poem a very gentle, song-like quality effect. It is lyrical for observing nature's small moments. Dickinson is varying this pattern, so there's slight irregularities, but also she's Dickinson. She can do whatever she wants. So the slant rhyme usage. If you're going to tell a rhyme, tell it slant. So stanza 1, walk and raw. In stanza 2, there is grass and pass. There's dew and wall. There's abroad and head. There's crumb and home. There's seam and swim. The technique creates a sense of things that are almost, but not quite connecting, much like the relationship between the human observer and the bird. There's close observation, but there is a separation between the two. She offered him a crumb. It doesn't say that he accepted the crumb. The punctuation strategy. There are midline pauses, like a bird, comma, came down the walk. There is an emphasis highlighting key moments, like he did not know I saw. There is a breathing space that allows the reader to pause and observe, like the speaker. This is a beautiful poem. It is the transformation from mundane to transcendent. It is beginning with a small observation, a bird eating a worm. It ends with a beautiful description of American poetry. It shows how Dickinson is paying attention to these small moments that can be so beautiful. The final stanza has liquid sounds in it, which is so interesting. Then oars divide the ocean, to silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks of noon leap plashless as they swim. What's interesting about the final stanza is that it is reminiscent of Anglo-Saxon strong stress alliterative meter. So I'm reading some books right now. There's one, it is written by David Rothman and Susan Spear. It is Learning the Secrets of English Verse. And in one of the beginning chapters, it just starts from the beginning. And there's Anglo-Saxon strong stress alliterative meter. Why do you care? I'm going to tell you. There are only, according to Spear and Rothman, there are 3 rules for this, and I'm going to find them. It actually is really interesting. There's one is, I'm flipping pages as I'm trying to, oh, here it is. Okay, so the rules are, for Anglo-Saxon strong stress alliterative meter, which was, this was Beowulf, this was Poems of the Past, it was Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. They're written in Anglo-Saxon strong stress alliterative meter. The rules of those are, each line must have exactly 4 long stresses. 3 of the strong stresses in each line must alliterate each other, and most lines should be unstopped. Now, the reason why this is really interesting for Emily Dickinson's poem is because she does that, and it's so amazing. This is Anglo-Saxon strong stress alliterative meter. That was written, well over 1,000 years ago. I'm not going to do the math. I could. I don't. I'm not gonna. It's way over 1,000 years ago. For anyone that actually knows, they're going to be like, it's exactly 1,500 years ago. Whatever. It's a long time ago. It was when Beowulf, Sir Gawain. Okay. So with alliteration, it means generally that the consonants are reflecting each other. So 2 silver for a seam. The silver and seam are alliterative. Butterflies off banks of noon. Butterflies and banks are alliterative. What's really fascinating, though, is the first line. Then oars divide the ocean. Did you know that all vowels are alliterative to each other? A's, O's, E's, they don't use the lips, they don't use the tongue, they all are more open vowels. All vowels are alliterative. That's fascinating. So when I read this, I'm looking at this ancient form of poetry that Dickinson is using like it's nothing. She's incredible. It's beautiful. If you didn't know that, now you do. So, thank you, Emily. Thank you, Starbucks, who is not advertising on us, but, they have great cafes that you can stop in when your kids are at karate. So that is our first episode of beating the horse. What was that I said? It was a dead horse we can't stop beating. What is poetry really? I think it's an unending question. And we're going to keep going. So, there you are. All right, party people. That is it for today. So if you've enjoyed diving into the world of verse with us, please join us next time. We've got more poets to meet, more poems to explore, and more literary adventures to share. So until then, keep reading, keep writing, keep poetry close to your heart. Thank you for joining POETICS Podcast, where we bring poetry to life, one verse at a time.